All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're tackling something pretty important, uh, teaching English as a second language
Yes,
to young learners.
to young learners.
And to get into it, we're going to be looking at a fascinating podcast I just listened to
Okay.
that really digs into some creative strategies,
Yeah.
and I think it's got some great takeaways for any of you out there who are working with kids in this area. So
Absolutely.
let's jump right in. What really stood out to me, and I think this is the foundation of everything else,
Mm-hmm.
is how much emphasis the podcast put on understanding just like the developmental stage
Right.
of these little guys.
Yes.
I mean, they're not just tiny adults.
Oh, absolutely not. No, they have their own unique way of learning and interacting with the world.
Right.
And if we want to be effective as teachers, we really need to get that.
Yeah.
You know?
So let's break it down a little bit. What exactly did they highlight?
Well, they talked about 3 core needs of young learners,
Okay.
and those are stimulation, security, and individual attention.
Ooh.
Yeah, and all of these kind of work together, right?
Yeah.
So you've got these kids, they're little sponges, they crave stimulation, they want to explore, they're curious, but at the same time, they need to feel safe and secure,
Right.
in their environment to really open up and learn.
Absolutely.
And then on top of that, you have to remember that each child is an individual.
Yes.
So individual attention.
So important.
Yeah. They learn at their own pace. They have their own strengths and weaknesses.
Right. And it's tough because that means you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. You have to be adaptable. You have to be observant and really tailor your approach to each individual child.
Totally. And I love that they brought up using things like games,
Yeah.
colors, songs. Like those are all really good for stimulation,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Those are fantastic tools for engaging young learners. They appeal to their senses, they make learning fun, and they create a positive association with the language.
Yeah. And I'm curious because they mentioned games specifically, but are there certain types of games that you found work really well?
I think anything that involves movement
Okay.
and sensory experiences tends to be a hit with young learners.
Yeah.
For example, I don't know if you've ever played Simon Says.
Oh, of course, a classic.
A classic, right?
Mm.
But it's fantastic for teaching action verbs
Oh,
and following instructions, and you can adapt it to focus on any vocabulary you want.
it's so versatile.
It is.
You can literally use it for anything.
Yeah, you could do colors, animals, body parts, anything you're working on.
And that actually segues perfectly into the next big thing I wanted to touch on from the podcast, which is behavior management.
Right?
I mean, this is such a crucial aspect
Oh, essential.
of teaching,
Yeah,
especially with young learners.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a well-managed classroom,
Right,
it's very difficult to get anything done.
right. And they're not going to learn anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what did the podcast recommend?
Well, they emphasize this two-pronged approach,
Okay.
which I thought was really interesting. So you've got the positive reinforcement, but then also strategies for managing those
Right.
difficult behaviors.
Yeah, it's not about punishment.
Right.
It's about setting clear expectations and really focusing on what the kids are doing well.
Right. So it's more about guiding them towards the right behavior.
Exactly. And one of the things they suggested was using simple rewards like stickers or praise.
Oh, that's classic.
It is classic, but it works.
It's classic for a reason.
It's classic for a reason because kids love it. They respond to positive reinforcement.
And I think it helps build that positive association with learning, too.
Absolutely. It makes them feel good about themselves and about learning English.
Yeah, and it creates a positive classroom environment overall.
Exactly. So it's a win-win for everyone.
I also thought it was really interesting
Okay.
that they talked about using stories
Yeah.
to kind of like illustrate good behavior.
Oh, storytelling is incredibly powerful,
Yeah.
especially with young learners.
Have you used that much?
Oh, all the time.
Yeah.
Kids are naturally drawn to stories. It's a way to capture their imagination
Yeah.
and teach them valuable lessons without being preachy.
Right, because you can kind of like sneak the lessons.
In there.
Sneak them in there,
Yeah.
exactly. You can find stories that deal with sharing kindness, respect.
Right.
And then after you read the story, you can have a discussion about it. You can ask the children what they learned from the story,
Right.
how they would feel in the character's shoes, and it really helps them internalize those lessons.
Like relatable for them.
It is. It's relatable and it's engaging.
Okay, so we've talked about managing behavior. We've talked about understanding their developmental needs. But now let's get into the actual meat of this,
Okay.
which is developing their English skills.
Right.
What did the podcast highlight in terms of that?
Well, they are huge advocates for interactive activities.
Okay.
Things like missing word games, the
Yeah.
classic ABC song,
Yeah.
and really emphasizing learning through movement.
I was really intrigued by that idea.
Okay.
Learning through movement.
Can you explain a little more about what that looks like in practice?
Sure. So instead of just saying the word jump,
Yeah.
have the children jump every time they hear it.
Okay.
So they're physically experiencing the word.
Yeah.
You can do this with all sorts of verbs: clap, wave, run, walk, and even prepositions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you could have the children stand under a table or beside a chair.
I hadn't even thought about teaching prepositions through movement.
It's a great way to make it concrete for them.
So how do you even start with that?
I mean, with a very young learner, how do you even begin to explain?
Like the concept of under.
Right. So you want to keep it simple and fun.
Okay.
Start with the basic prepositions.
Okay.
Like under and on.
Yeah.
Use real objects in the classroom.
Yeah.
Have the children physically interact with those objects.
So they're actually doing it. You're
Yes.
just hearing it.
And as they get more comfortable,
Yeah.
you can introduce more complex prepositions like next to, between, in front of. But the key is to always make it a physical experience.
I love it. And I think that actually ties in really well
Okay.
to the next point, which is all about building their confidence.
Yeah.
Because learning a new language can be scary or intimidating,
Oh, absolutely.
Oh.
It's a vulnerable
especially
experience,
for a little kid.
especially for a child.
So what did the podcast suggest for creating that supportive environment?
Well, one of the biggest things they emphasized was handling mistakes with gentleness.
Okay.
So instead of pointing out errors directly, they suggested techniques like rephrasing.
Yeah.
So, for example, if a child says, "I go to the park,"
Yeah.
you might respond with, "Oh, you went to the park. That sounds like fun."
Right.
So you're acknowledging their effort. You're providing a subtle correction
Without making them feel bad.
without making them feel bad.
Exactly. And they also talked a lot about praising even simple sentences.
Yes,
Uh.
every little step forward deserves to be celebrated.
Yeah.
When children feel encouraged and supported, they're more likely to take risks. Experiment with the language.
Totally. And that kind of brings us to the bigger picture,
Okay.
which is the roles of the teacher
Mm-hmm.
and the parents in this whole process.
Yes.
The podcast really emphasized the importance of collaboration.
Oh, absolutely. It takes a village to raise a child, and it takes a team to teach a child a new language.
For sure.
So for teachers, it's all about being positive role models,
Yeah.
using clear and simple English, and keeping that classroom energy high.
And for our listeners out there, I mean, whether you're a parent
Hmm.
or an educator, think about how those principles can apply
Yeah,
in your setting.
absolutely. Think about how you can be a positive influence, how you can use language that is appropriate for the child's level,
Yeah.
and how you can create a fun and engaging learning environment.
And they had some really good advice specifically for parents,
Yes.
like encouraging shared reading, reading together,
Yeah,
creating opportunities for English practice at home,
absolutely.
things like that.
It's about making English a part of daily life, not just something that happens in the classroom.
What about those situations where maybe parents
Mm-hmm.
aren't fluent in
Oh.
English themselves?
That's a great point.
Like, how can they still support their child?
Well, the podcast had some great suggestions for that, too.
Okay.
They talked about finding creative ways to incorporate English into everyday routines,
Love
even if it's just for a few minutes each day.
Yeah.
Things like singing English songs together,
Okay.
watching short cartoons in English, or even just labeling common household items in English.
Yeah.
It's about creating a language-rich environment,
Right.
even in small ways.
Even if you don't speak the language
Yeah.
perfectly yourself.
Exactly.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive into this podcast, I want to leave you with a little challenge.
Okay.
Think about what resonated with you the most from everything we've discussed.
Mm-hmm.
And what's one creative way that you could maybe incorporate play-based learning
Yeah.
into your English lessons?
That's a great challenge.
Yeah.
And remember, every interaction is an opportunity to ignite a young learner's passion for language. So keep it fun, keep it engaging, and celebrate every little victory along the way.
I love it. That's a perfect way to end. On that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive,
Thank you for having me.
and we'll see you next time.
See you next time.